The Solstice groaned as its hull absorbed yet another direct hit. Sparks showered from the overhead lights, casting flickering shadows across the bridge. Captain Alec Vance gripped the armrest of his chair, knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Xanther fleet was closing in fast, too fast. "Shields at 12%, Captain!" Lieutenant Sarah Kane's voice was calm, but the tension rippled beneath. Alec spared her a glance. Even under the pressure of imminent destruction, she remained focused, her dark eyes scanning the controls for any edge they might use. "Divert all remaining power to the forward thrusters," Alec ordered. His voice cut through the chaos, steady despite the storm brewing around him. "We go straight for their flagship." A murmur of disbelief echoed through the bridge crew, but none questioned him. They couldn't afford hesitation. Humanity's last warship was all that stood between the Xanther and Earth. The rest of the fleet, the rest of humanity, was gone. "Captain," Sarah said softly, leaning closer, her gaze sharp. "If we go through with this, we won't have enough power to retreat." "There's no retreat," Alec muttered, eyes hardening as he faced the looming threat on the display. The Xanther warships were colossal, sleek predators of metal and light, designed to wipe out entire civilizations. His fingers tapped a rhythm on the armrest, the only outward sign of his nerves. "We disable that warp gate, or Earth is finished." The bridge fell into a tense silence, broken only by the distant thrum of the engines and the constant blare of damage reports. The Solstice shuddered again, its frame groaning under the assault. Alec could feel the weight of his crew's unspoken thoughts. This was their last chance. Sarah leaned back to her station, hands moving swiftly over the controls. "Course laid in. We'll be in firing range in 3 minutes." Alec nodded. 3 minutes? In 3 minutes, they would know whether they'd saved Earth or died in vain. The familiar hum of the engines deepened, vibrating through the deck as the ship lurched forward. On the display, the Xanther flagship, the Oblivion, loomed larger, its shields impenetrable, its weapons bristling. Alec's mind raced, calculating, weighing the impossible odds. "We've seen what they can do," Alec began, loud enough for the entire bridge to hear. "But they haven't seen what we're capable of. They think we're broken. Finished. But as long as one Terran ship flies, we are not beaten." Sarah's gaze flicked up, meeting Alec's. There was something in her eyes, a glimmer of belief, despite the grim reality. "Incoming fire!" a crewman shouted. The bridge erupted into chaos as the Oblivion unleashed a barrage of plasma beams. Alec felt the deck beneath him shudder violently. Sparks exploded from the consoles, and acrid smoke filled the air, burning his throat. Alarm screamed. "Evasive maneuvers!" Alec barked, his voice straining to rise above the cacophony. The ship lurched again, throwing crew members from their stations. He caught himself on the armrest, heart pounding. The tactical display flickered, shields were down to 5%. "Captain, we can't take another hit!" Sarah shouted, her calm facade finally cracking. Alec clenched his jaw. There was no more time for strategy. "Prepare the weapon!" The bridge fell silent once more as the crew realized what he was asking. The pulse cannon, an untested, experimental weapon, was their last hope. It could drain what little energy remained from their engines, leaving them defenseless, but if it worked, it could wipe out the Oblivion in a single strike. Sarah's fingers hesitated on the console. "Are you sure about this?" Alec didn't answer immediately. His gaze fixed on the Oblivion, now filling the forward view screen. The enemy fleet was vast, stretching into the void like an endless wall. Earth was behind them, its blue light just visible, a fading beacon in the darkness. "We don't have a choice," Alec said finally, his voice low but resolute. "Fire the pulse." Sarah's hand hovered over the trigger for a heartbeat longer, then she pressed down. The pulse cannon hummed to life, the entire ship trembling with the power surging through it. A moment later, a blinding burst of energy erupted from the Solstice, hurtling toward the Oblivion. Alec held his breath. The fate of humanity was in that single shot. The pulse of light from the Solstice sliced through the void like a burning spear, crackling with energy as it raced toward the oblivion. Alec Vance watched in tense silence, the bridge around him utterly still, each crew member holding their breath. Time seemed to stretch as the glowing projectile crossed the distance, until a violent explosion tore through the space ahead, a blinding flash momentarily obscuring the view. Alec instinctively shielded his eyes as the shockwave rippled outward. The blast was so powerful it rattled the ship, throwing a few crew members off their feet. "Direct hit," Sarah Kane reported, her voice strained but laced with cautious hope. She stared intently at the viewscreen, where the aftermath of the blast shimmered in the darkness. Alec's heart pounded in his chest, the ringing in his ears subsiding as the flare died down. But as the smoke cleared, the oblivion emerged, battered but still intact. "No," Alec whispered under his breath. "Their shields absorbed most of it," Sarah murmured, frustration lining her face. "We barely scratched them." Alec clenched his fists, forcing himself to think. They'd thrown everything they had into that shot, and it wasn't enough. The oblivion, massive and relentless, continued its approach, more ominous now than ever. Alec's gaze flicked to the tactical display, where the remaining Xanther fleet was already shifting position, preparing to swarm. The bridge buzzed with renewed panic. Crew members scrambled to their stations, shouts of incoming threats and damage assessments filling the air. "We need more time to charge the pulse again," Sarah said, her hands moving rapidly over the controls. "At least 5 minutes." 5 minutes we don't have," Alec replied grimly. His mind raced, calculating their dwindling options. There was no way they could withstand another full-scale assault. Every instinct screamed that this was the end. Yet there was something deeper in his gut, an unrelenting drive that wouldn't allow him to surrender. "Lieutenant Kane, patch me through to all channels," Alec ordered suddenly. Sarah hesitated for a moment before complying, her fingers hovering over the console. "You're live, Captain." Alec rose from his seat, his gaze sweeping over his crew. They were battered, exhausted, but he knew they were listening. And on the other side of the line, Earth's remaining defenses, broken as they were waiting. "This is Captain Alec Vance of the Solstice, last surviving ship of the Terran fleet," he began, his voice clear and commanding. "We're not done yet." He paused, glancing at the enemy formation closing in on them. "They've taken everything from us, our cities, our worlds, our people, but they haven't broken our will. We're fighting not just for survival but for humanity itself. And as long as we have breath in our lungs, we will not fall." The bridge quieted, the crew listening intently. Alec's gaze softened as he added, "We've faced worse odds before. And we've always found a way." Sarah's eyes flicked up from her station, locking onto Alec. There was something fierce in her expression now, something unyielding. The doubt from moments earlier faded, replaced with the same iron resolve Alec had just summoned in himself. "Captain, incoming transmission from the lunar base," a communications officer interrupted. "It's General Harris." "Put him through," Alec said, settling back into his seat. The screen flickered, and the hardened face of General Harris appeared. His voice crackled over the comms, a mixture of fatigue and steely determination. "Vance, I heard your speech," Harris began. "We don't have much left, but you've got our support. We'll distract the smaller ships. Buy you the time you need." Alec felt a surge of relief. "Understood, General. We'll handle the oblivion. Do whatever it takes," Harris replied before the transmission cut out. Alec looked to Sarah. "Begin charging the pulse. Divert every ounce of power we have." Sarah nodded, her hands flying over the controls. The familiar hum of the pulse cannon began again, low and dangerous, like a storm building in the distance. "The Xanther ships are moving in," the tactical officer warned. Alec gripped the armrests of his chair. "Hold the line. We just need a little more time." The oblivion loomed ever closer, its weapons glowing with the ominous charge of another attack. Every second felt like an eternity, as the ship powered up for what would likely be the final blow. Alec could feel the tension in the air, the hum of the pulse cannon growing louder, vibrating through the deck. "We're at 80% charge," Sarah reported, her voice tight. Almost there. The Oblivion fired. A massive blast of energy surged toward them, too fast to evade. Alec's heart pounded in his chest as the seconds ticked down. Brace for impact! He shouted, his voice barely audible over the blaring alarms. The energy waves slammed into the solstice, sending the ship into a violent spin. The bridge tilted, crew members thrown to the floor as sparks flew from damaged consoles. Shields failing! Sarah shouted, clinging to her station as the ship shook violently. Alec steadied himself, his jaw clenched in defiance. Charge complete? Sarah hesitated only for a split second before nodding. We're ready. Alec's gaze hardened as he gripped the controls. Fire! The aftermath of the pulse fired from the solstice lingered like the echo of a distant thunderstorm, reverberating through Alec's mind. The blinding light from the blast had dimmed, but the tension aboard the bridge remained thick, palpable. Everyone waited, breaths held, as they watched the screen. The Oblivion drifted through the smoke, its colossal form marred by the searing impact of the pulse. The once pristine hull now crackled with flames, jagged scars running along its surface. It was damaged, but not destroyed. Captain, it's still moving! Sarah's voice quivered, her hands still hovering over the controls, pale knuckles showing the strain. Alec gritted his teeth. They had given it everything, but the Oblivion continued its relentless advance. His mind raced through 1,000 options, each one seeming more futile than the last. The reality was dawning on him. They couldn't win this battle head-on. Damage report, Alec commanded, his voice low but steady. He couldn't let the crew sense his doubts. Shields are down to 15%, engines at 40%. Weapons, we've got nothing left, Sarah responded, her fingers dancing over the console. We're sitting ducks if they fire again. Alec clenched his jaw. The ship groaned around them, metal protesting under the strain. They were out of options, out of time, and out of hope. But something deep inside him, a primal instinct, refused to surrender. Any word from General Harris? Alec asked, knowing that reinforcements were the only thing standing between them and certain annihilation. None, the communications officer replied, tension filling her voice. I've lost contact with the lunar base. No signals are coming through. Alec's heart sank further, but he couldn't show it. Not now. He rose from his chair, his back straightening as he faced the crew. They were watching him, looking for guidance. For leadership. Listen up, Alec said, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. We might not have much left, but we're not done yet. We're going to keep fighting, because that's what we do. The crew exchanged glances, their fear simmering just below the surface. They all knew what was coming, but Alec's words sparked something in them, a flicker of resolve, however small. We're not giving up this ship, he continued, his voice hardening. We're not giving up this fight. If we're going down, we're taking them with us. Sarah's eyes flicked to Alec, admiration sparking behind her grim expression. It wasn't the first time he pulled them from the brink, but this time felt different, more desperate, more final. Captain? The tactical officer interrupted, her voice sharp. The Oblivion is charging weapons! Alec's heart lurched. The enemy ship was preparing to fire again, this time with no defense left to absorb the hit. This was it, the endgame. He turned back to the view screen, watching as the massive warship's cannons glowed with the ominous light of imminent destruction. We need to move! Sarah shouted, her fingers scrambling over the controls. But the engines... We're not fast enough. Alec finished for her, his voice hollow. He knew what was coming, could feel the heavy weight of inevitability pressing down on him. But then, something changed. A sudden blip on the radar caught Alec's attention. It was small, almost insignificant compared to the Oblivion, but it was moving fast, too fast. Captain, there's something coming in from behind the Oblivion, the tactical officer reported, surprise clear in her voice. Alec leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the screen. A new ship was entering the battlefield, cutting through space like a missile. It wasn't one of theirs, but it wasn't Xanther either. What the hell is that? Sarah muttered, her eyes wide. Before anyone could answer, the mystery ship fired a volley of high-velocity torpedoes, each one striking the Oblivion with pinpoint accuracy. The enemy's ship shook violently, explosions ripping across its surface, tearing through the weakened hull. Alec's heart raced as he watched in disbelief. Whoever this was, they were hitting the Oblivion harder than the Solstice ever could. "They're crippling her!" the tactical officer exclaimed, her tone shifting to one of astonished hope. A moment later, the comms crackled to life. A deep, gravelly voice came through the speakers, laden with battle-hardened confidence. "This is Captain Rylus of the Vanguard. Looks like you could use a hand, Terrence." Alec blinked, trying to process the sudden turn of events. The Vanguard, an Ion warship. Reinforcements from the Ions, Earth's only true ally in the galaxy. Alec felt a surge of relief wash over him, but there was no time to savor it. "Rylus, you couldn't have timed that better," Alec said, his voice finally betraying a hint of a smile. "We've been tracking the Oblivion for days," Rylus responded. "Didn't think I'd get the chance to save your skin, but here we are. Let's finish this," Alec said, adrenaline kicking in once more. "What's your plan?" "We'll keep the Oblivion busy," Rylus replied. "You hit her with everything you've got left. She's weak, now's your chance." Alec turned to Sarah. "What do we have?" "Not much, but enough for one final shot." "Then let's make it count," Alec said, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the last stand. "Ready the cannon," Alec ordered. "And fire on my mark." The Oblivion was still reeling from the Vanguard's assault, its defenses in tatters. Alec watched the targeting display lock onto the ship's exposed core. "Mark!" The Solstice unleashed its final pulse, the beam streaking across space with lethal precision. It struck the Oblivion dead center, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, with a thunderous roar, the ship erupted into a cascade of fire and debris, pieces of the once mighty warship disintegrating into the cold vacuum of space. The bridge of the Solstice erupted in cheers, but Alec remained silent, staring at the screen, watching as the Oblivion was consumed by flames. It was over. For now. The wreckage of the Oblivion still floated outside the viewport, twisted metal shards glinting against the dark expanse of space. But the victory felt hollow to Alec. He leaned against the railing of the command deck, watching as emergency teams worked frantically to repair the damage to the Solstice. Around him, the crew bustled with quiet urgency, their earlier cheers now replaced by the grim reality of their situation. "Reports from engineering, Captain," Sarah said as she approached, datapad in hand. Her voice was steady, but Alec could sense the exhaustion behind it. "Go ahead," Alec responded without turning. "Shields are completely offline. It'll take hours to get them back to full strength, maybe longer. Our weapons are down to basic pulse cannons, anything heavier is shot. Engines are holding at half capacity. We're barely operational, sir." Alec exhaled, nodding slowly. "Understood." His gaze remained fixed on the wreckage outside. He could see the Vanguard hovering in the distance, keeping a watchful eye on the debris field. "Captain Rylus saved our skins today," Sarah continued, trying to find some light in the situation. "Without him, we'd be floating with the rest of them." Alec finally tore his eyes from the window and turned to face her. "We're not out of this yet," he said, his voice lower. "This was just one battle. And we're barely holding together." As if on cue, the comm system crackled, and the familiar gravelly voice of Captain Rylus filled the bridge. "Alec, you there?" Alec tapped his earpiece, straightening. "I'm here. What's the situation, Rylus?" There was a brief pause before Rylus spoke again, his voice carrying a more urgent tone. "We've picked up something. The Oblivion wasn't acting alone." Alec's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Our long-range sensors just detected a fleet, an entire armada, heading in this direction. Xanthar ships, hundreds of them. Whatever they lost here, they're coming to reclaim it in full force." The words hit Alec like a blow. His mind raced as the gravity of the situation set in. They had barely survived one warship, and now an entire fleet was on its way. "How long do we have?" Alec asked, his voice steady despite the knot of dread forming in his chest. "Less than 24 hours. Maybe less if they push their engines. They're coming fast." Sarah's face drained of color, and Alec could feel the weight of her gaze on him, waiting for direction. But there were no easy answers. The Solstice was crippled, and even with the vanguard, they stood no chance against a fleet of that size. Retreat wasn't an option either, not with Earth just behind them. "Options?" Alec asked, scanning the bridge crew for suggestions. Sarah spoke first, her voice laced with tension. "We could attempt to send out a distress signal to the Lunar Command, but if the Xantha are jamming communications—" "They are," Alec interrupted. "We've been cut off since the battle began. We're on our own out here." A murmur of unease spread through the crew, but Alec raised a hand, silencing it. "Panic won't solve anything. We need a plan." A few tense moments passed, each second ticking louder in Alec's mind. Then, unexpectedly, it was Rylus who broke the silence. "We'll buy you time, Alec." Alec frowned. "What are you talking about? You're not going to outrun them, and neither are we. But the Vanguard is better equipped for evasive maneuvers and hit-and-run tactics. We'll engage them first, scatter their forces. It'll give you time to get your ship back in fighting shape, or to escape." "That's suicide," Alec replied sharply, his chest tightening at the thought. "Even the Vanguard can't hold off an armada for long." Rylus chuckled, the sound grim but resolute. "Since when did we start worrying about the odds? We're warriors, Alec. This is what we do." The weight of Rylus' words sank in. Alec knew his Iron ally was right. They didn't have many choices left. But sending Rylus and his crew into certain death wasn't something Alec could accept. "We'll fight with you," Alec said after a moment, his voice firm. "We'll repair what we can, and when they arrive, we'll fight side by side. If we go down together." There was a pause, then Rylus' voice came through again, quieter this time. "I knew you wouldn't run. That's why I like you, Terrence. Always so stubborn." Alec smirked, though the tension in his chest remained. "Stubbornness has kept us alive this long." "Then let's see how far it'll take us," Rylus replied. "We'll position ourselves on the far side of the debris field. If they try to flank you, we'll hit them where it hurts. Be ready." "Understood," Alec said. "And Rylus, thank you." "Don't thank me yet, Alec. We've still got a fight ahead of us." The comms went silent, leaving Alec standing on the bridge, the weight of the coming battle pressing down on him like a vice. He turned to his crew, their faces pale but determined. "We've got less than 24 hours," Alec began, his voice commanding. "We need every system we can salvage. Weapons, shields, engines, focus all efforts there. Prepare for combat. We fight soon." The crews sprang into action, the tension on the bridge shifting from fear to determination. Alec watched as they moved with purpose, a sliver of pride cutting through his anxiety. As Sarah moved past him, Alec caught her arm. "I need you in engineering," he said quietly. "We can't afford a single mistake." Sarah nodded, her usual confidence showing cracks, but she met his gaze with a firm resolve. "We'll be ready, Captain. One way or another." As Sarah hurried off, Alec returned to the viewport, his eyes scanning the wreckage once more. Somewhere, beyond the debris and the stars, the Xantha Armada was closing in. They were coming. And Alec knew that this time, there would be no retreat.